So, Dimension, we're talking about humanity once again, but we're going to be talking about its towns and locations throughout the map. But I kind of wanted to know, do you think humanity should keep using their handcrafted kind of map design, or do you think maybe it should go for more procedural generation?
I feel like we could have a bigger map maybe if we had some procedural generation because it would be less work on them. But I think that we might miss out on things in the long run because the more time you spend exploring the world of humanity, the more care you can see put into certain areas. Now, there are some things that look similar, look the same. There might be a few assets reused, but for the most part, you don't have a lot of like copy paste like you do in some of these other games that we see.
What I like about hand designed maps, and mind you, I don't hate procedural generation, I like procedural generation, but hand designed maps allow for storytelling, for visual storytelling. And in humanity, I feel like you see a lot of that. Even though I know you're kind of like disconnected from the player, and I know you can zoom in, you still get a lot of that visual storytelling, even from a distance. And I think that's what makes handcrafted maps like in the game Humanity so amazing is because you can see the detail, you can see the stories, you can see maybe kind of what went down and what happened. Like one of the largest cities in Humanity, you literally see somebody going, "Don't go in," or "They were wrong," and that kind of stuff. And it's a big thing of spray paint on the side of a building as you walk past this military checkpoint that has all these cars kind of put in front of it to try to stop people from entering. And I think with procedural generation, it would take a lot of effort to get that kind of look to happen.
Yeah, and you can also they also add little details. Like if you notice some of the houses have graffiti on them. And some of the stuff they put in the game, I don't know all the references to everything, but I know some of the stuff they put into the game are two people who have been playing since day one. Two heavy contributors. I know there's at least one item I know specifically that points to another streamer that I hang out and chat with a few times. And it's very cool to see things like that. And yes, you can do that with the items. They have that specifically with the items. But again, they also have these spray painted walls here and there, this graffiti here and there. That doesn't just seem to be random junk on the walls. It seems to be some kind of shout out or tribute to something, at least in my mind. That's the way it looks to me. It's a little too specific to just be something random. And if they procedurally generated this stuff, that might be things like that might be a little more difficult to get those details in the right spot is not as easy as when you're hand making this stuff and choosing where to put everything. And like you said, the barricades, the towns, you're able to set up different barricades based on how big the town is a lot better and a lot easier with this hand drawn map because a lot of the towns have barricades in front of them and on the main roads, but they don't all look the same. They're not all just copied and pasted like I said with other things. You see some differences.
Well, it's cool that you talk about these barricades and these, roadblocks and other kind of things because it really plays not into the visual aspect only, but also plays it into actually how you play the game. Because while you can climb on top of a lot of things, you can go around stuff, it does present different challenges when it comes to fighting off the Zeeks or even the hostile raiders because they themselves are kind of the ones who are setting up these like almost ambush locations. I'm not sure if you've ever been ambushed in Humanity, but yeah, you can get ambushed and it's kind of crazy. But like, and mind you, the ambushes are dynamic. They will be the next time you play. But still, the fact that they took the time to make that area be a place where there's hostile NPCs ready to come and attack you. But you have to go around with your car and you have to slow down because if you go too fast, you're going to run into the trees and destroy your car. So you start getting shot at. Now you're trying to drive as fast as you can and you make a mistake and you flip the car. And now you're kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. Yes, you got away from the bandits, but at the cost of your vehicle. And I believe this kind of effort, when it comes to hand design maps, is really where it kind of shines. And almost everything either has a story, a purpose, or adds to the difficulty of the game in some way or another.
Something else I noticed today specifically as I was playing is it seems like they're putting certain buildings into the game and sealing off certain areas of those buildings, but not in the sense that, hey, I just want to take up some real estate. To me, it looks more like they're designing these places and going ahead and putting them in the game and setting them up to possibly have more interaction in them later on. Now, that's not official information. That's just me kind of reading the room and reading the situation, and maybe a little bit of hope mixed in there, a little, here and there. But like, specifically, I noticed today a motel. I went and searched the bottom floor of the rooms, and I noticed there was two staircases on the outside that went up to like a balcony area and opened up into more rooms, but both of the staircases were blocked. But they were blocked with like shipping crates. And for some reason, my mind, I was just like, I wonder if they're going to set this up later to be able to use some of these top floors. And the one of the reasons why I think that is because of all of the progress that the HumanitZ team has made, and I feel like they don't put a lot of stuff in the game that they're not at least going to try to use at some other point. There's been a lot of times where I've run into certain buildings, certain locations that I'm like, man, this just doesn't seem finished. It seems useless right now, but why is it here? And then an update or two later, it starts to open up and you're starting to be able to go in there and explore that area a little bit. They're literally improving the map so often and improving the location so often that they don't actually keep the actual map that you can pull up with up to date because they're changing it so often. If you're playing and you're checking your map, you might notice you're standing in a building that's not on the actual in-game map. And
Yep.
that's not an error, that's not a game glitch. That's literally them just saying like, "Hey, we're going to finalize this before we do too much changing on this because we're changing locations and buildings and adding stuff so often that it would be inefficient for us to change this map every time as well."
A good example for what you're talking about, how like sometimes they have things in the game, but they're placeholders, not necessarily, the building itself, but like all of the garbage that were on the stairs in the very beginning of the game. Those buildings still exist, but then there are buildings exactly like it that have all of the garbage on the stairs removed. And now you can go up to the second floor and loot up there or build your base up there. They have apartment buildings that have, like, I think up to 4 stories that you can go all the way up them. And some of those apartment buildings have the access to the stairwell blocked off. Now, there are other ways you can get up there by base building your way up there or jumping off a car and jumping to the second level. But the fact is it allows for players to be creative in the ways they can access these buildings. But more to the point, they're always adding stuff in with more possibilities later. So I 100% agree with that kind of point.
And we're talking about stories and we're talking about like reading into the different barricades and the skeletons and different rooms. A lot of this stuff is left up to interpretation, and we're kind of writing our own survivor stories in our heads when we see these things.
Now, we talked about procedural generation and we talked about the map design, and we've been praising the map design a lot. But if you could put procedural generation in humanity, where would you put it and how would you use it?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I think the real benefit of procedural generation and humanity would have to do with the bandits and the bandit camps, because like you mentioned earlier,
Ooh.
they are kind of static. You can have random raids, you can have like a roaming party of bandits come towards you and attack you. You can come upon an airdrop, and that's kind of in a random area that you have to fight bandits. But the bandit camps, as far as I can tell and from what I understand, are always where the bandit camps are. They don't
Mhm.
change if you start a new world. So if you play long enough and you've started a new world often enough, you kind of know where those places are, and you either know to be prepared when you go there or you know to avoid those areas. Same thing with the Zeeks. There may be a different number in certain areas, but you kind of get used to knowing, like, hey, there's probably going to be a group of Zeeks in this area because that's the way it always is. They're always in this spot in the town. They might be a little bit more spread out, but I know they're going to be in this building, around this building, things like that.
See, I like that idea, but what I would go for is I would like to do procedural generation with points of interest being handcrafted. So the landscape and the way to get to those points of interest change, but not the points of interest themselves. So like you got a big town and all of the land in between, let's say town A and the big town change every time you start a new game, but they wrote the procedural generation in a way that the roads always lead to that big city, and it's just the way that the terrain is. So like every island is unique except for the points of interest are not completely different. I can see that being kind of nice because then you can still focus on, your points of interest, handcrafted, telling those stories. But then, everything in between can be random every time. And I'm not talking about like a lot of randomness, but still random enough that, like, hey, this cliff wasn't here the last time I played. We're going to have to go around this cliff to be able to get to the city that's another kilometer away, et cetera, et cetera.
I will have to mention my favorite location and something that I hope we get a little more detail in and maybe a little more functionality is the prison. I really like the prison. I like the setup in there, and that's kind of where I have my base started and where I'm working on my base in my own playthrough.
Did I mention the prison warden? I hear. But, folks, thank you guys very much for joining us as we explored HumanitZ's towns and locations and what we thought about their handcrafted design approach. Thank you very much for joining the State of Survival, and join me in thanking Dimension 119 and Red Falcon for always being in the background and help keeping the show running. Ta ta for now.
See you in another dimension.